Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Hello, this is the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And today we're going to be talking about the topic of buy-in. And we're going to describe that a little bit more when we get down to it. But before we do, Claire, tell us, how was your week?
My week was good. It was kind of a week of, we talked last time how we were talking about adapting to online learning. And so it was kind of everybody is learning how to do the online learning and everybody's having different challenges. And so it was kind of a week of both improving how we're doing it and trying to adapt to everyone's different challenges with internet access and stuff like that. And so it was, just a lot of figuring out how to be flexible and how to make it work for as many people as possible kind of thing. Yeah. My week was sort of, I don't know, it felt like a little bit slightly more depressing. Not that it wasn't all depressing before, but just a little bit like I wasn't having a great time in the beginning. But I feel like the kids were slightly more aware of like they're not going to see their friends for a long time, which is okay. They're at a good age where it's not like, I can't imagine having a teenager right now. That would be really tough. Mm-hmm. But and then I kind of felt like one thing I have been realizing is about timekeeping, okay, which sounds ridiculous, but I think in my head I was like, yeah, I just need to go in and be on Zoom at 11 o'clock, but I really need to like have a 10-minute like coming into being like, I can't just go from like good luck husband, take care of the kids and then suddenly be on Zoom. Like right. I need a kind of a warm up into like, what am I doing, where am I like it just and so somehow I think but this week I was kind of like, oh my God, it's 5 to 11 and here, husband, take care of the kids and this is where their lunch is and blah, blah, blah. And then running in and I wasn't kind of smoothly coming in. So right. I did not think that would be an issue because you're in your head, you're like, I just have to get from my kitchen to the bedroom. Right, the smallest commute ever.
But then, yeah, exactly. But then the mental transition from, doing reading with the kids to teaching a physics class on Zoom is a bigger journey.
That makes a lot of sense.
Distance from, so I kind of hadn't been factoring that into my timekeeping. So I think I need to have at least an extra 15 minutes of
transition
powering up. Yeah.
How interesting. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. First of all, it's a huge transition mentally. And then second of all, I don't know if you're feeling this way, but I'm needing a little bit more time to prepare for lectures because it's a different format. So I can't just do the normal thing. I've got all my normal tricks that are not working now. So I need to think in advance what my new tricks are going to be.
Yeah, and actually, thanks to you told me about the polling function.
Oh, yeah. How's that gone?
And it's really cool. And I kind of was like, I'm going to try and do like active learning sort of voting questions. And then that was a bit of a disaster. Like I needed to have all that kind of keyed up. Like I was sort of like, I'll just share my screen and I have it on the screen. But it just wasn't like right. I need to practice that or do something better with that. So, but I'm excited that it's a possibility. And I was able to do like, has everyone done the homework or has anyone started the homework and get a little bit of a read on that.
That's
so
a
that
great
was
idea.
Super helpful. I'm glad you told me about that.
Well, I'm really glad you told me about the breakout rooms because I tried that last time and it really made the difference for me of between feeling like we're just doing this fake class to like, we're actually having a discussion kind of like we would in a real class, Yeah, and it's weird. And they've gotten a little more comfortable because last week I was just circling around like appearing like this Wizard of Oz head in the thing. But this time they were like actually, they can request help. Oh, I didn't know that.
And so it's kind of cool because then it ended up like I was kind of hopping around a lot more. Interesting. But it's weird. They will not say anything in the main session. But once they're in the breakout rooms, I guess because it's a smaller group, they can start doing their stuff. So yeah,
that's
I like
huge game changer.
I feel like we could actually just right now have another episode of Zoom teaching.
Okay, but buy-in.
But it's true. Yeah. Okay, so I have my quote.
Okay, what's the quote?
Okay, and my quote is because on the advice of you and Ralph, I was like getting back into watching Star Trek Next Generation.
Oh, cool.
And it's what I need right now. Like Perfect. It's my stress watch because it's very mellow.
It's so mellow.
And like they read treaties and it's not very aggressive and it's just very cool. So of course my quote is going to be from Jean-Luc Picard.
Wonderful.
The actual best. So it says, He says, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not weakness, that is life." And so I feel like that's super relevant to the buy-in idea.
Yes.
That you can do everything right and still have it not quite work out. And like it's not necessarily, sometimes it's just the way it goes, or there's so many factors that kind of factors that factor into it. But
right.
How many times can I say factor in one sentence? But it's, yeah. So should we talk a little bit before we start about what we mean by buy-in?
Yes. Yeah. What are you thinking of?
It feels like it's just the difference between the times when students are sitting there like so skeptical the entire semester and never kind of get on board whatever crazy bus you're on, and other times I've had classes where they're like, "This seems kind of weird, but we'll go along with it and see what happens," and they're just kind of on board and enthusiastic about whatever it is. But again, like, not necessarily, I can't pinpoint that to any one thing that I do, but it just makes all the difference in terms of
totally.
And I've had classes where they're actually pretty nice, but they resist everything. Why are we doing this? Why do we have to do? And it's exhausting. Sure. And so there's the mysterious kind of buy-in where I think it's really comes down to trust, that they trust you and they trust the process and they believe, instead of like, why are you doing that? Why? Like, sometimes when they have bought in, they're like, yeah, we'll see where this goes. And then, this did turn out to be useful after all. And
they trust that you have somewhere in mind to go and some reason for doing the things you're doing. That I agree. That makes sense.
And what about for you? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think something about having some faith that we're going somewhere, and that, the things that I am deciding to do with the class have some, I've thought about them and there's some reason behind them. And if they believe me in that, then it's a lot easier. So how do I get them to believe me that I have a plan?
And I think when you said the word there, belief and faith, like that's why it's so tricky, right? Because it's not, and like with our science minds, like you want it to be like, if I do these variables, then this is the outcome. And
sure,
it is not the outcome.
And it might be if we knew all the variables, but the students are always a variable, and their collectiveness and their individuality, those are all added variables that it's really hard to quantify. So
yeah, it's really weird. Sorry, I'm just going into the negative straight away. But always, when I started teaching somewhere else, I remember I had this class and it just went wrong. And it was just this one student. I remember he sat in the front corner, and it's like, I remember thinking of it almost like an infection, but like it just spread out from him. And it was weird because there was 2 lab sections, and the one that he was in, my evaluation for that was substantially lower than any evaluation I've ever gotten. And it was just so interesting seeing this kind of spread of discontent that came, and I definitely had a role in all of that, like not handling it as well as I wanted to, but it was just so interesting to see, like, the 3 people sitting around him suddenly started grumbling, and then it just spread out. It was ridiculous. So
discontent is always contagious. So
and I'm very susceptible to what my peers are thinking.
Totally. Me too.
Big time. But so do you want to say what has been working well for you?
Okay, sure. So I think one of the things I find helpful is to be sure that I'm coming at presenting how we're going to do things with confidence. Instead of saying, we're going to try this thing, I always try to say, this is how we're going to do this. And then I might even follow it up with explaining why I'm choosing to do it this way. And sometimes I'm very explicit, like, it has been shown that retrieving information from your brain helps your memory, helps solidify those paths. Yeah. And so that's why we're practicing with this particular thing right now, is you're practicing retrieving that information. And so my hope is that gives a little credibility, like this isn't just some wacky thing that Claire came up with to kill some time. This is something that we're intentionally doing as an example of how to remember things. And so I think that helps with buy-in.
I think that's huge. And I think there's a real issue, especially when you do any kind of active learning or anything, where people like kind of you know, often the thing you get on like the evaluations is like, well, I didn't pay to come here and teach myself this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think if you don't do that intentionality and sort of clarity about what you're doing,
Right.
it can really, they can be like, oh, like I've had students sometimes, actually not about me for a change, but about other professors, like, oh, they just always give us this worksheet when they don't know what else to do.
Right.
And it's like, but just saying, oh no, so we're doing this question because it's a good, like you said, like a good way to practice such and such a thing.
Right.
Actually, I think really does make a difference.
The
in building
worksheets,
that trust.
yeah. Worksheets is a great example. I do a lot of worksheets in my one class, and they are very intentional, and I really think, in general, the students get a lot out of them. But I do periodically have a couple students who say, oh, it's just a worksheet day, I'm not coming. And I'm like, wait, no, this is not just a worksheet day. Yeah. And so that means that I have not managed to get the buy-in from those particular students. Other students find it really helpful. And so I always get on my evaluations some people saying, the worksheets were my favorite thing, and I really got to engage with the material and see if I understood it. And then other people are like, well, the worksheets were the waste of time. So some people I'm getting the buy-in, but I still need to work on it a little bit with some of those students.
And that's super interesting. I wonder, like, not that there's any way of tracking this, but I wonder what kind of students they are. Like, are they the ones... Like, I was very much a student that was like, just give me the information. I want to go home and process it by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, like, sometimes I can imagine
Sure.
it's uncomfortable for certain students doing worksheets.
Right.
Because, you know, and I think it is really good for them. And I think that's what they should be doing. But it's funny how they're like, ugh, whatever. Like,
Sure.
this is, you know.
Sure.
But yeah.
And of course,
But
one of the reasons to do worksheets is to engage a variety of learning styles. And so some people, that might not be their comfortable way. And so that is a barrier, but I agree with you that it's beneficial for them as well.
True. And I think, and then again, like, you can say, hey, like, something, this might be your favorite, like, cup of tea,
Mm-hmm.
but it could help someone else. So we try everything and we do different things. But yeah, I like that a lot. I think the intentionality and being honest about what you do.
Yeah, and presenting it with confidence. Like, it's often tempting to say, oh, this is something I thought would be good to try, but that's really bad language for getting buy-in, you know?
Totally.
Much better to say, here's this thing, this is what we're doing. Even if it's the first time you're doing it and it really is a test, to be like, this is why, this is what we're doing, just really confidently, I think helps build confidence. You know, confidence is contagious too. So. Oh,
totally. And I think, and there is, I'm always back on my patriarchy buzz, but there is like a gendered issue too, where like if you kind of seem like, well, I don't know, and like I think people are a little quicker to kind of get on like, she doesn't know what she's doing.
Yeah.
You know, and so there is a little bit of that. And yeah, that's super interesting. I like that a lot. I think the more clear, and I think we taught a class together, and you did a really great job of being really clear about what the motivation behind certain assignments and stuff was. And I think in that class, that really improved the buy-in.
Yeah, because that was a freshman class, and so a lot of the students were really new to all the things we were doing, and so
yeah, and I think buy-in had been a problem in the past, and I think that like your approach definitely improved that a lot. Yeah.
So what's working for you with buy-in?
I think for me, one of the things that does work well is I described it earlier on in the starting this semester episode that we did about that first assignment where it's sort of making them introduce themselves on Canvas, and I think it's sort of saying something about how I'm going to run the class, and I think it does it with sort of an intentionality, and then I do explain why we did that. And so even if people are like, that is the biggest pile of nonsense, I hate it, they kind of like are getting a vibe of what it's going to be like in the class.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think so I think that really helps. And then the other thing that sort of was a surprise to me, and I didn't really know this was a thing that influenced buy-in. I had a student who visited my class who had been in the class before.
Okay.
Did I explain
like that was the second level of a class and you'd had her in the first level, or?
No, so I was teaching the first level of the class and she visited the class to talk about tutoring or something. But she had also already taken that class with me.
Okay.
And I sort of was like joking with her, and I was like, oh, can you tell them like this is, you know, it's possible to survive this class and it's okay to get through.
Okay.
And she said, yeah. And the biggest thing you should know about Ruth is she doesn't try and trick you.
Ooh.
Like she won't. And I was like, oh, and I didn't think that was a thing, but I think that is actually true in my exams and stuff, and I don't sort of change the goalposts, I'd like to think. And I didn't realize, but I think that is a really big thing. And sometimes I definitely feel like I have more buy-in after a first exam or a first quiz.
I see.
Where that's kind of been shown that it's not going to be some sneaky move, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't think people do this on purpose, but I have heard plenty of stories from students about other professors doing sort of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, obviously not intentionally, but it feels like that to the students. Like, oh, they said this was going to be a super straightforward exam, and then it turned out it was this, or like, you know, something. And I think that can really be a breach of trust.
Yeah. Interesting. And so that would really hinder the buy-in that was already there, maybe.
Yeah, and I think if they, like, the biggest thing I guess you want to convince them of, and I think you might have said this before, but it's like, if you do all the work, you will do fine.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And I think they don't believe that in the beginning at all.
Mm-hmm.
They really don't believe that. Like, they always feel like, especially like my experience with their attitudes towards physics is that it's just this kind of mysterious thing that you either have it or you don't.
I see.
And the kind of concept of like, no, if you do the work, I promise you will, you know, you will be successful.
Sure.
And I don't think that's necessarily always true for them in a lot of classes.
Right.
So I think when they start to believe that, that really helps with the buy-in.
We're back to belief. I like that. That makes sense.
Yeah, and
believing
and
in
if
the
they can kind of
structure
relax
the
into
right.
And like if you give them like a study guide and say these are the things on the test, if they believe you, then they will do those things and prepare for them.
Right.
But if it's like, well, I can do all this and then she's going to pull some random thing out of nowhere, then you know that kind of breaches that. So that was really surprising to me. That was this was her reason why you should believe in the class, was because it wasn't going to like pull a sneaky trick on you at some point. So that was definitely a surprise, but I think super true.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's great.
Yeah. And so what are the things you are working on?
So one thing that I think really helps with buy-in that I'm able to do periodically but want to do all the time is having like a story arc to the lecture. You know, like ideally it would be one topic. You'd like start with a question or something, and you'd start with a question that they already know something about, and it'd be interesting, hopefully. And then you'd go through all this material, and throughout it, hopefully, there'd be more interesting tidbits, but it all relates back to that initial idea, and then by the end of the lecture, you've learned something about that, you revisit the question, it's all one cohesive chunk of topic, and you feel like you got somewhere. Like, if you can make the lectures into that story arc, I just think those really come off well, and it really shows, first of all, it shows that you did have a plan. It was all put together, you know, you're not just going through random content, but also it just feels more satisfying, I think, to the student to see that. And on the occasion when I've managed to make that happen, it's been really great. And I mean, ideally, I'd love for that to be every single lecture.
Dude, you're kind of both blowing my mind, and I'm like, whoa, and then I'm like, oh my god, I'm feeling so much anxiety because I'm like, I never do that.
Oh, but you
like,
do, I'm sure, sometimes.
No, I kind of, like, sometimes, like, once in a while it's happened, but I feel so impressed by professors who have these kind of, like, I always hear the word, like, almost lesson plan. And I feel like what I'm doing is I have a chunk of material, I just tune in, here we are, I'll get through however long it takes, and then we tune back out again. And I think I might have told you this before. I remember someone being at a class and someone was like, oh, like, can you imagine those professors that just make their syllabus the table of contents from the book? And I'm like, oh, is that a bad thing? Like, is that not what we're doing? So it's sort of, but that's so cool. And so the times that it's happened, was that a plan you had, or is it just, oh, look, this happened?
Well, so my normal strategy is kind of what you're saying. I've got this long list of content, and, you know, we get through however much we get through. And so the times that it's kind of magically happened have been where the amount of time that I had planned for a topic fit the lecture time really well, and I got some buy-in with some interesting things at the beginning, you know? And so if we can, like, start with something interesting and then end the content at the end of the lecture
having got somewhere. So yeah, it kind of just naturally happens
really,
periodically, but I think
magical.
it could happen more often if I was more intentional about it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I always think, like, what if we only had one class to teach every semester? Like, how amazing would we be? We'd be like, so, yeah.
Yeah.
But that is really cool. That is like, and that's that real feeling of like, oh, this captain of the ship really knows what she's doing. And this is like a whole,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's bound to get better and better the more we teach these classes. Because, you know, now that we know the content, you know, we're each at the point where this is our 4th year with these, you know, in this university. So we've got some, I feel like every year I can get closer to that goal. It'd be a lot to do it all in one semester, of course. But if I can just get a couple lectures periodically.
It's amazing too how energizing it is.
Yes.
Like when you feel, and that's something obviously we're completely lacking at the moment.
Right.
That kind of buy-in feeling from them and just the energy that comes with that.
Yeah. So what are you working on?
Oh, my thing is, I'm going to use the less sweary version of this. You'll be glad to know, but it's smart mouths. You know, just those disgruntled people, and it's really difficult to kind of work around that and sort of navigate them. You know, and I definitely feel like earlier when I was teaching, like it would like really distress me. Like that one class I was talking about, I think it was actually the first semester I came back after having my second baby, so I was already not like super steady anyway, and it was like an 8 a.m. class, and there was a lot of things that were like already set up to not be great, but it was just this one guy, and just everything I did was just like total material for him to like snicker, and some people, I think when someone is like, you're going to mess this up, their response is like, watch me not mess this up. And mine is more like, lay down on the floor.
Like, okay, you're right, I did mess it up. Yeah, it's true.
Right, and kind of like, it makes me make more mistakes.
Yes, totally.
And, you know, and it's amazing because when you have that class that is bought in and they just believe in you.
Right.
It's just like, oh, of course we knew that was a plus or a minus, or you know, like they
it
just
becomes
kind of...
not a big deal. You're like, oh, so sorry, that was a plus, and then we're moving on, as opposed to being
right. And they're just like, okay, but you know, and then for these other people, it can be like, oh, great, well now can we even believe anything you've ever said?
Exactly.
You know, and it just sort of like really falls apart. And I think like, so that class, I used to feel a dread going to that class,
and then that's already set you in a bad state.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing because I was teaching the same class to 2 different classes, and it was just like night and day. It was so different. And then my second semester here, another time where I think a lot of it is to do with vulnerability from other life things too.
Sure, of course.
But I was feeling really vulnerable because, you know, it's just starting here and it's a different kind of job. And I had these like 4 kids, and in my head I used to call them the Dementors.
Oh no.
Because like they literally, every time they would walk by, I would just feel this like icy cold dread. And even for like 2 years afterwards, they were still on campus. Man. And if I saw one, I would be like, oh God, like all my happiness would drain away. But
you need chocolate.
It was, I know, that's what I needed to have in my pocket. That's where Lupin would have come in handy. But you know, and the thing that I really sort of let myself down with was like, I let them dictate whether I was doing a good job or not.
Sure.
And later on when I got my evaluations, so many people were like, I wish you had shut those guys down earlier. You know, and it really impacted them, and they were kind of, I almost like let myself get bullied. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like, we all got through it and survived, but it was
that's good.
Deeply, like, yeah, it was just barely though. It was deeply unpleasant. But then I feel like last year I had a class that, and there was no one who, there was a couple of problem students, but they just resisted everything. But I felt so much more confident in my own abilities. That's I was great. Like, okay, whatever, like, yes, we will get through this, and I will tell you for the 97th time why we're doing it this way, and you will roll your eyes, but we'll still keep on trucking. And
interesting,
you know, it was just kind of, so that difference felt like it was to do with me not feeling as vulnerable and feeling better able to kind of shut them down and be like, okay, I know you think that, but you're so wrong, so I'm going to keep, you know, that sounds meaner than it actually was, but
sure
yeah,
so that makes
it's just
sense.
It's
your state would, of course, if you're already feeling down, then it'd be really hard to deal with. It'd be harder to deal with. But so that's great to know that if we can get ourselves in a good position, totally.
And I think
then we're much more set up to deal with that. I'm sorry.
Right, and I guess is that... No, sorry, I did too. But is that something, I guess maybe like you said, that just comes with time?
I think
where,
so.
Like, yeah, we kind of... And it's weird because I guess like the negative of that could be students could have a genuine concern. You're like, whatever, I know
true.
exactly what I'm doing.
That's
and
true.
Like, but I think we have a ways to go before we get there.
Yeah. I think also what you said fits with the idea. I think it's important to nip these kind of problems in the bud. So if you do have students that are really messing with buy-in, the earlier that can be dealt with, the better. Which of course it's really hard to, but yeah.
Yeah, I had a positive experience one time where I had a kid in the class and he was just kind of constantly like, well, yeah, obviously, and just grumbling and mumbling all the time. And I wrote this kind of email to the whole class and I was like, look, I'm really happy to work with you guys, but just grumbling and complaining is really unconstructive. And so if you want to talk to me about something, but just kind of, and this kid, and I just wrote it to the whole class and I was like, if there's something, kind of look at how you've been behaving in the class, or I can't even remember what I said, but he wrote me an email and he was like, I'm really sorry, I feel really ashamed of myself, this is not normally how I am, I'm a freshman and I think I just got kind of caught up in trying to seem smarter. It was like the most unbelievably thoughtful response, and from then on it went okay. So I think you're right, like if you can nip it in the bud. Students always joke with me about like you could do a thing where you plant someone on the first day and then you're like, they ask a rude question, you're like, what did you say? Get out of my class, and like kick them out, and then like they could like
set the tone.
Like, I think
don't mess with Ruth.
I think some professor did that with his daughter and got his daughter to pretend to be on her phone, and he like threw her phone out the door. There was some like video of that.
Oh man!
So maybe that's what we need to do is like show your dominance on the first day.
I don't know if that would help with buy-in.
You just like, it depends what kind of buy-in you're going for. Like terrified, like silence, then that would be something. But
oh man,
this is really helpful actually, because I feel like when I wrote this down I was like, I don't have any way of dealing with these smart mates, and then now that I'm saying it I'm like, oh actually sometimes
it works.
You do, and and sometimes it's just a bummer, and it feels like a bummer for all the students in the class in general, but it's just sometimes it's going to happen, right? Where it's just not going to be as magical.
Sure. There's going to be some range of magicalness, and, we're just going to keep aiming for as good as it can be, but there's always going to be a range.
Yeah. I like it. Okay, good stuff. Now, trying to get buy-in when we're doing these online classes and we don't know what we're doing is a whole other thing.
Right, We'll talk about that again once we have a better idea.
Yeah. And I feel infinitely grateful that we are, like, I feel very sympathetic towards people who are on quarters, who are starting new classes.
Totally.
Because I feel like at least we had some kind of relationship with these students before, and that has been really helpful for me.
Totally.
For sure.
I've definitely been thinking about how different it would be and what to do to start a new class with new people online, and how to get the buy-in from them at that point would be a different challenge. Totally.
Okay, well, we did it.
All right.
We bought into our buy-in episode.
I'm bought in.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Ruth. And thank you, Ralph.
Thank you.
For setting up, as always. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.